Hi, I'm so glad to be here. My name is Stephanie Jordan. I am an author, teacher, and speaker. My newest book is called The Death Tsunami and is available on Amazon. And I am going to talk to you about my journey with widowhood and my experience. And it was absolutely the hardest thing I have ever had to go through. My late husband and I got married in June of 2004, and we had a complex marriage. It was very interesting. There was never a dull moment. We built a lot of life together. We had 5 children together. Well, that's not totally true. I had one son when we got married, but he raised him as his own. So then we birthed 4 together. And we opened a business and bought a house, and there was a lot of life lived in the 10 and a half years we were married. And on December 29th of 2014, he passed away suddenly from hypertension. And that night, I was there with him when he passed away, and it was surreal, actually. He was 38 years old. I was 37. He thought he was having indigestion and gas issues, and I knew nothing about heart issues and heart problems, and it just never even occurred to me that he was dying. And he had asked me to get up and rub his back, and I took 3 steps to the end of the bed, and he started having a seizure, and then he was gone. He turned blue pretty much immediately. And I called 911 and tried to do chest compressions, and the ambulance got there, and they worked on him for about 30 minutes, and then they called it. And that night, all I could remember thinking was that I felt like I was going to vomit. I just kept thinking, don't vomit, don't vomit. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't find my breath. I really couldn't find my breath for probably 2 years afterward. I just, like when you take a deep breath and feel it inside your lungs, like I couldn't do that. I couldn't feel my breath. It was very shallow. And I just kept thinking, why can't I breathe? Why can't I breathe? And I remember I had 5 children. My oldest is 13. Then I had a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, a almost 2-year-old, and an 8-month-old. And I had my 7-year-old son on my lap and was telling the kids what had happened. And they were all just devastated. And so then we started the journey. My book's called The Death Tsunami because when death comes in like that, it wipes out everything. It wipes everything out mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. And I would say for the next week, we were dealing with the tsunami wave and just getting beat up. I could barely form a thought. I had friends come in and help, and I guess I ate. I don't really remember. Taking care of the kids. My 4th had her 2nd birthday 2 days later, and she They threw her a party, and we were just getting beat up by the spiritual wave of death. See, the antithesis of God is death. The antithesis of God is not Satan. Satan is just a deceiver, and he's an enemy of God. He is not the antithesis of God. And Satan is already defeated. But God sent Jesus to come to earth in physical form to do the same process that we do, which is die, so he could access death in the same way that we do. And it took him 3 days. It took God 3 days to defeat death. And the Bible tells us that Jesus got the keys to death and Hades. And then he came back in his resurrected form and then ascended back to heaven. So, see, Jesus didn't come here to defeat Satan. Satan is already defeated, right? He came to defeat death, because death is the antithesis of God. God is life. And maybe the reason I couldn't find my breath for 2 years is because Jesus is the breath of life. And when death came in, it steals life. It steals everything. Death will haunt you. Death will hover. Most people I know that have dealt with death that closely want to die too. It's like it just summons you. It just pulls you in, death does. Like a vortex, just this spiritual vortex. It's so dark. Once you deal with death, there's a darkness. And the thing is people, you can't see it, right? Because it's all happening in the spiritual realm. Like, we are 3 parts. We are flesh, our body, and then we are spirit, and then we are soul, which is our mind, will, and emotions. And so we are 3 parts. And our flesh is the only part of us that we can see. There's 2 parts of us that we can't see, that we don't acknowledge. And those are the realest parts of us, right? Our flesh is the part that goes away. It will dissipate. It does not carry on with us. But our soul and our spirit carries on with us. And so when death comes in, it's our soul and our spirit that get eaten alive by death. And we also experience it physically. After my husband passed away, that whole next year, my family, I had 2 kids end up in the hospital. I ended up passing kidney stones and had to go into the hospital. We all had crazy sicknesses and illnesses, and I felt like I had been run over by a train. Like, it was miserable. And that I didn't realize that death was so physical. And it took all my emotional energy. People can't build relationships when they've dealt with a death and a feeling that intense. They don't have the emotional energy for years. Not for a month, not for 2 months. We are talking years they don't have the emotional energy. And when people are devastated emotionally, that's when you'll see them start using major coping mechanisms, trying to function. Our culture today just treats you like it's, the flu. Like, in 10 days, you should be better and back to the grind. And all of humanity, there used to be mourning periods that, you would wear black for a year, 2 years, 3 years. There was a mourning period. They understood that death just eliminates your, you. as a person, and there was a period of time of healing that needed to come along with it. And I think the reason is because death was not sterilized back then. Today, people die in hospitals. The family leaves the room and nobody sees them again until the funeral. And back then you would have had to prep the body, and you would have been an active part of what was happening. So I think people had a greater understanding of the need of the pain that death brings. And then spiritually, because death is the antithesis of God, it totally corrupts your spiritual side. It will make you angry at God. It will make you hate God. It will make you resent God. It will bring in all of these negative emotions towards God, and you start blaming God. But the beauty is that God sent the answer through Jesus Christ to death. So God did not leave us in this place of void. He filled that void with Jesus. But if we don't have Jesus, then we feel the void because nothing has filled that void. And so spiritually, I really had to dig into forgiving God. I had to be real with him about how angry I was and how hurt I was and how betrayed I felt and how awful it was and how I didn't understand why he took my husband. My husband was a fantastic father, and we were building life together, and we were growing, and things were good. And we had just had a miraculous healing in our marriage. We had had a very, very hard time in the last couple of years of our marriage. And we had had a lot of complexities in our marriage that made our marriage very complicated. And God had done some miraculous healing work, and we were doing the best we had ever done when he passed away. And so, though that was a grace and mercy, it also made it really hard because I felt like, oh, we're just now in this really good place and now he's gone. And so it felt like he was stolen from me unfairly. And so I really had to talk with God about all of these feelings. And it took me years to forgive God. It took me years to not be angry that my husband had passed away. Not be angry at God anymore, and recognize that that God gave me hope, that God is still providing, that God promises to be close, that God promises that he will complete what he started, which means that if he allowed Jay to die, that Jay was complete this side of heaven. And see, here is not our goal. Earth is not our goal. Heaven is our goal. And so we just have to trust God that he is still good, even when we can't see it. And so mentally, you will be attacked as well. And when you're spiritually corrupted and emotionally corrupted, the mental side can be just super astronomically difficult to handle. And so with the mental side, there again, you'll see people really getting into very unhealthy coping mechanisms with addiction, using drugs and alcohol to avoid the pain, and shopping and hoarding and all of these kind of really unhealthy behaviors. And so to really help the mental side, you have to begin to heal spiritually and emotionally. But I'm also going to challenge to focus on your gut, because the gut is the second brain. And healing begins in all of our three primary areas, which is body, soul, mind, will, and emotions, and our spirit. So you have to focus on all three of those components to truly be able to thrive after death comes in, after you have experienced the death tsunami. And if you're on the other side, if you are somebody that has a loved one who has experienced really close loss of a parent they were dependent on, or a child, or a spouse, anybody that you've been dependent on for sure, and anybody you've nurtured and cared for a long period of time, those are really close losses. And it can be a friend to a family member, but especially those core primary nuclear family losses of parent and child and spouse. You have to be patient with them. Widowhood and that kind of loss is a long, it's the long road. It's marathon loss, right? These are not losses that people get over easily. Sometimes people will get remarried quickly because they're trying to fill in that void and that pain, but they're still going to have to grieve. They're still going to have to process through their emotions of the loss. And so just walk with them and be patient with them. If it's somebody that's lost their spouse, they went from having two people operating to just one. They need help. Just show up. They won't know what to tell you to do. Just show up. Do the laundry. Throw a load in. Put some clothes away. Unload the dishwasher. Just basic things like, hey, can I grab you anything from the grocery store? Drop it by your house. Hey, I made you dinner and set it on the porch. It's a long haul game. It doesn't go away in 6 months or a year. So just keep keeping on. Keep staying in the game with them. Keep allowing yourself to love them, maybe when they can't love themselves, and be patient with them when they don't know how to be patient. One experience I had is that, it was like my brain melted. I couldn't form complete thoughts. I had no recall. I might even know who you are and not be able to recall your name anymore. And that was something I did not expect. I did not expect my brain to basically go to sleep, but it was a mercy. I believe that the brain kind of shuts off as a mercy because you can't possibly process or comprehend everything that you need to go through at the time. And mentally, you just kind of go to sleep in a lot of ways. And so eventually you want to try and work through waking that back up. And I even did some memory games for a little while to try and help jog my brain into working normally. But, life continues on, which makes it really, really complicated. So have grace and patience and mercy if you're the one that's experienced loss for yourself and for others. After Jay passed away, I was like, grace for everybody. Like, grace for everybody, because there was no ability to stay mad. I didn't have the emotional energy to remain angry. I was too angry at God and too angry at my husband for dying and too angry at what was happening for me to have anger toward anything trivial or, not as intense as those things. And how did I process that anger? It took a really long time. Anger took a really long time to get through. Probably because I've always kind of liked anger. Anger has always been, I guess, a safe emotion for me. Anger is a propelling emotion. Anger, like when you're angry, you move, right? So if you're angry at a situation, it propels action. And I've always liked that. The difference between that anger and the anger that comes in with death and a close loss is that there's nothing to do with that anger. You can't move anything. You can't change the situation by moving. You can't change the situation by doing anything. So there's no component of anger and that propelling force that comes along with anger. There's nowhere to go with that with death. It falls in the death void. But with Jesus, anger is not a thriving emotion, right? And so you have to get to this place of reconciling with your anger and maybe even not understanding it, but giving it to God and allowing Him to soften that anger and process through that anger and be authentic and genuine. If you're thinking it, He already knows it. So it doesn't matter whether you spit it out of your mouth or not. So anger was a long-term journey that I had to go through. And there were no particular steps. I did journal. The whole first year, I journaled every day. And there were lots of F-bombs. I had pretty much eradicated that word out of my vocabulary until my husband died in my bedroom floor and left me with 5 kids. Then nothing else quite fit like the F-bomb. So there was a whole lot of that in my journal that first year. I wanted to break everything. I kept thinking if I could just get on my roof and scream at the top of my lungs how angry I am, that it would solve something. Of course it wouldn't have, but I just felt like it would make me feel better. I wanted to just break everything. And I started using a phrase called, I want a nuclear bomb my entire existence. Which is how I felt like if I could just blow it all up, right, that would make me feel better. And really, it would not make me feel better, right? It was nothing that you do when you're angry usually makes you feel better. It just feels like a justification at the time, and it was movement. And eventually I had to realize that anger wasn't benefiting me. It was destroying me. And so I had to quit thinking. I had to shift my mindset from being mad about everything to being grateful. I'm grateful that I still have my house to take care of. I'm grateful that I still have, some stability. I'm grateful that I still have all my kids. I'm grateful that I have my life. I'm grateful that I get to wake up every day and make a difference. I'm grateful that I get to go to work. I'm grateful for these things and beginning to shift. And it didn't happen overnight. It was one little thing at a time to be grateful for, because there were a lot of things I wasn't grateful for because they were so very hard. But as I got better and better at shifting my perspective and saying, I'm grateful for these things. I'm grateful for this challenge that lays ahead of me. And I had to learn to time manage and money manage and discipline myself. And I would say becoming a widow is when I grew up at 37 years old. Prior to that, I was functioning as an adult, but I wasn't really a grown-up. And widowhood brought in maturity that I had never had before. It forced maturity upon me. And I was either going to harness maturity and let that carry me forward, or I was going to keep bucking it and break my neck in the process. But it was already on me. I couldn't get away from it. It was either embrace it or fight it. So, if you are dealing with a close loss in your life, Get some support. Grief Share is a great place to start. Griefshare.com, find one close to you. And start processing through the pain and the hurt and the anger. And remember that God has given the answer through Jesus Christ to fill that void. And I promise you, you can survive and you can thrive through loss. Again, my name is Stephanie Jordan, and God has made something out of nothing.